This is CounterPoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granic Allen. Canada is facing a pivotal moment in how it balances security, privacy, and individual freedoms. Bill C-22, the federal government's proposed Lawful Access Act, would expand law enforcement powers to access Canadians' digital data. Supporters say it's about keeping up with the modern crime, but critics worry it could put privacy and civil liberties at serious risk. But this debate isn't just about digital surveillance, from challenges against municipalities that restrict citizens from recording local meetings to defending free speech on campuses and public spaces to opposing censorship of controversial messaging. Canadians are grappling with questions about transparency, expression, and constitutional rights. Well, joining us to unpack these issues is John Carpay, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, the organization that has been on the front lines defending Canadians' charter rights through litigation and advocacy. John, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. So C-22
So
has
glad
now...
to be with you.
Thank you. So C-22 has entered our vernacular. This is, I guess, the latest step in maybe curtailing, maybe expanding. I'll let you be the adjudicator of that. What are the biggest risks to privacy and liberty with C-22?
Well, it is a building block for the surveillance state. I'll mention just two provisions. It's a lengthy bill, but one of them is that it's going to require, if passed in current form, it's going to require Bell, Rogers, TELUS, other large companies to retain metadata for a full year on everybody. And so this would include your calls, your emails, your texts. And that includes with that where and when you have phoned people, who you phoned, and where you have been. So if this metadata is kept on file, which the companies would be required to keep it on file for a full year, it gives the government access to not just criminal suspects, but to everybody. And this is not necessary because currently the police have the power right now under the criminal code. If they suspect somebody's, a terrorism, child pornography, crime ring, whatever, they can go to a large company and they can place a preservation order and say, well, for this, Mark Smith person, we have probable grounds that they're involved in criminal activity. We're ordering you to preserve the data on Mark Smith. That's currently the law, and that's fine. But this is forcing companies to keep the data on everybody.
Wow. So why? Why is this happening? What's the impetus? Can you surmise?
Well, politicians never take away our rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext. So they tell us that this is all about, the language speaks very soothingly about facilitating access to basic information and modernizing the act, right? Which sounds great. I mean, why would you not want to facilitate access to basic information?
Right.
But words are the sugarcoating of the pill that we swallow. We can swallow a bitter pill if it's got sugar coating on the outside. So here we have nice words about, we're going to fight crime. We're just going to modernize. We got to bring the law up to speed with the technology. Well, again, that's not true. The existing criminal code provisions allow police to place a preservation order with a company, ordering the company to preserve all data in respect of one individual where they have reasonable and probable grounds to suspect criminal conduct. So that's kind of a good balance that we already have, where law enforcement can demand and eventually obtain with a court order data about an individual if there's reason to believe that it's child pornography, terrorism, some other crime.
And sorry, you said with or without a court order, they're allowed to do that?
They're allowed to... They can obtain the information with a court order.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The preservation order, if there's urgency, I'm not sure if a court order is required for that or not. I'd have to get back to you.
Yeah, so I think that seems to me the balance that most Canadians assume is existing. So with C-22, and we only have about 20 seconds, C-22 would erode that requirement to get a court order.
It would. And then the second part after the break is the Supporting Authorized Access to Information Act, which
Yes.
is another large component of Bill C-22.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to continue on this discussion when we return from this commercial break. Please stick around. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We're discussing a plethora of legal injustice and charter rights issues, and we're really tackling Bill C-22, which is a federal legislation that would probably impact your life and how the government accesses and potentially surveils you. And joining me again for these discussions is John Carpay, president of Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. John, thanks again for being here. So it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom when we talk about C-22. It seems that it will really change the way law enforcement kind of governs surveillance and how they monitor our everyday online activity. Where should the line be drawn? Because I thought things were okay, and if it ain't broke, why fix it? So what's the right balance we need to strike here?
The right balance is the one that we've had for centuries, where the starting point is that every citizen is entitled to privacy. So governments cannot listen in on your phone conversations. They can't install a video recording, a camera in your living room or any other room of your house. Starting point is privacy. And then secondarily, privacy can be violated when law enforcement has reasonable and probable grounds. So not just merely a suspicion, but actually reasonable and probable grounds to believe that somebody's involved in crime.
Mm-hmm.
And then the police can go to court, they can get a warrant, and they could, when you're out walking the dog, they could bust in there and set up cameras and listening devices and leave again quietly. And they could start, or they could listen in on your phone conversations. They could get court order to, if they find out your phone number, and they can listen in and record all the phone conversations you're having with people. But it's narrow and targeted. It's limited only to suspected criminals, and only if there's not just a mere suspicion, like a fishing expedition, we think that maybe possibly, but if there's actual reasonable grounds to believe. So that's been our balance for literally centuries. And there's nothing about new technology that would need us to change that balance and say the starting point is privacy for all Canadians. The government does not have a right to listen in on my phone conversations or to install cameras anywhere. Secondarily, only if there's reasonable probable grounds, then the police can get a warrant from the court to violate my privacy and start listening in on my phone conversations or start monitoring which websites I'm looking at and who I'm sending emails to. So Bill C-22, in a nutshell, it's a departure from this centuries-old balance that we've had between protecting privacy and also allowing law enforcement to do their job and catch the bad guys.
So on the flip side, some proponents of this kind of legislation will say, well, international organized crime networks have become so sophisticated. They use all sorts of they're multifaceted in their attacks. We need to be equipped with this faster speed, so we don't always have to keep going to court if we need to access information. How do you respond to that kind of concern?
Well, that same argument could have been raised 50 years ago in the 1970s when there was no internet. You could have had somebody say, you know what, we can have better, stronger law enforcement if police just had blanket access to listen in on everybody's phone conversations. And don't worry, the police would only listen in on conversations of people that, where they truly had reasonable grounds to suspect them of being involved in crime. But this having to go to court to get a warrant really slows down law enforcement. And there's a kernel of truth in that. I mean, it does, having to get a warrant to spy on somebody does slow down law enforcement. However, it's still a fair balance because and it's not as if police are always there 100% of the time. There's rapes and murders and thefts, and there's all kinds of crimes committed. Police are not present. They come around after the fact. It's not like you can come up with some perfect law that's going to always ensure that unless you want a total police state and police are everywhere all the time, we don't want that either.
Well, it seems like there's so much legislation that is reworking privacy and what it means for privacy for a citizen in this country. I think you used the phrase privacy collapse. Is that what we're experiencing?
Well, very much so. That's the the philosophy seems to be that we need to repudiate centuries of tradition and have around the clock widespread surveillance to keep children safe from online harms. Like we have people suggesting that because of the tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, where a mentally ill person shot a bunch of people and then committed suicide, it's a horrific tragedy. We actually have people saying, well, AI should be legally required to report on AI searches that individuals are conducting and just pass that private information on to police. This is seriously being argued. So it's always a temptation. It's not different from the 1970s. The temptation was there, 50 years ago to say, well, police should be able to listen in on every telephone conversation because it's going to help to fight crime.
Right. Welcome back to Counterpoint. I'm joined by John Carpay, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, as we unpack a whole host of legal issues and charter rights attacks and all that fun stuff as it works its way through the system. John, thank you again so much for joining me. I want to depart from C-22. Okay, it's very clear. I feel like I've done so many shows on these issues, but our privacy is being challenged. Let's just use that phrase. What other challenges are we seeing to constitutional rights in Canada, and what other cases do you have at the front burner these days?
We've had municipalities across Canada, British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, Newfoundland. We've had municipalities that have suddenly got this crazy idea in their minds that they are allowed to ban the recording of public meetings. It was absolutely insane. I mean, if there's a public meeting of your town council, your city council, they're talking about the public business.
Right.
If there's something, really confidential, most, if not every city, they do have a provision that the councillors can discuss something in camera if it's sensitive. Maybe they want to fire their executive director, city manager, and they don't want to have that during a public meeting. So if they want to, they can go in camera. Anyway, the Justice Centre, our lawyers have written demand letters to various city councils. Whitby and North Huron in Ontario both changed their ways after getting a warning letter from Justice Centre lawyers saying you cannot prohibit citizens from video recording or audio recording a public meeting of city council. So we've had quite a few success stories. The Waterloo Catholic School Board, Jack Fonseca was a gentleman who pushed this, and the board caved after getting a legal warning letter. Others, we've had to go to court and sue. So we're suing the municipality of Springfield, Manitoba, which has dug in its heels and decided that citizens can't record their council meetings.
That's absurd that a municipality would seek that out. I mean, that's my opinion, because municipal government, it's for me, it's so cherished because it's the most accessible form of government. Your taxes, your garbage collection, the roads. What is so contentious that really ought not to be recorded. But I get it. There's that in-camera component where they can meet in private. But this just seems like a huge attack and affront on democratic access. It's absurd, truly. I don't understand why the need for secrecy. I get certain things, like you said, firing a CEO or something like that. But this is like a trend of the shutting down of basic democracy.
And then another case that's similar. It's not a city council prohibiting a recording of a public meeting, but there's a father of 3 children, Jeffrey Horseman, in Waterloo, Ontario, was, like so many other people, not happy about the recitation of land acknowledgements, Aboriginal land acknowledgements at public meetings. They are a controversial and I would say very hypocritical political statement. I've never met a proponent of land acknowledgement that's willing to give his house or condo to Aboriginals on grounds of returning stolen land. So they're rather hypocritical. But the significant thing is it's imposed on people, and that violates our charter freedom of conscience and religion. The Supreme Court has, in its rulings, a city council cannot open a meeting with a prayer, Christian or otherwise, because if it's a public meeting, the prayer is effectively imposed on everybody who is present, and that includes atheists or agnostics or members of religions that they're different from the prayer. So the same principle applies to land acknowledgements. These are, they're certainly political. You could even argue they're religious in a way. And what's even worse for Jeff Horseman, who is works as a professor, a university professor, so a father of 3 children. He was also told that we can't even have a discussion about whether or not to have a land acknowledgement, because having a discussion like that would be like a human rights violation and contrary to equity, diversity, inclusion.
So what, we only have 20 seconds. Is this lawyers for the board advising to take this course of actions? Because it seems really dim.
I don't want to guess what's behind the curtain, but if they're getting bad legal advice by digging in their heels. We've had to go to court on this, and we filed a court action on behalf of Jeffrey Horseman.
Okay. Well, we're going to pick up this and some more topics in just a few moments. Welcome back to CounterPoint. I'm joined by John Carpay as we unpack some charter and legal challenges working its way through the system. John, again, thank you so much for joining me. What else is percolating in the legal land of Canada?
Well, earlier this month, our lawyers were in court in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on behalf of Jeff Eveley, who's a gentleman who received a $28,000 fine simply for walking in the woods. And the reason he got a $28,000 fine was that the Nova Scotia government in the summer of 2025, so 9 months ago roughly, issued this crazy total prohibition on walking in the woods. You cannot hike, you cannot walk to a lake to go fishing or to swim in the lake or bird watching, on pretext of protecting the forest from forest fires. Now, obviously, a ban on smoking and saying, if you smoke a cigarette in the woods and get caught, it's going to be a $28,000 fine. I'd be fine with that. It's harsh, but, if we need a strong deterrent to prohibit an actual risk of fire, right? So no smoking, no campfires, no cooking in the woods. Okay, fine. This is a total ban on 3/4 of the province is suddenly out of reach of ordinary citizens who cannot walk or hike in the woods, go on a picnic, bird watching, fishing, nothing. So we were in court, firstly, to defend him. So there's 2 court actions. There's one is to defend him in the prosecution for the $28,000 ticket. But the other one is a proactive one to ask the court to declare that this ban is an unjustified violation of our charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person.
And I know some viewers will say, well, that was just a temporary ban. It's not like it lasted forever. But I suspect, and you can explain this to me, like if we start going down this path, and it's a slippery slope, if we start allowing these kind of minor infractions on our charter rights, then we're setting a bad precedent. Is that correct?
This ban was in place from July to October. Now, granted, I understand, you could go hiking in the woods in October, November, December, January. Okay, fine. But, that's more for the rugged, outdoorsy types that don't mind cold weather. The summer is typically a time when everybody, even if you're not really the outdoors type, right? Summer's kind of the fun time, especially to go into the woods. Mm-hmm. But if it's completely irrational and if it violates your freedom, why is it okay if it is temporary? Why would you even have a 48-hour ban? If the ban is completely ludicrous, useless, overbroad, unhinged from reality, then even a 48-hour ban on walking and hiking in the woods should be challenged in court, when the only legitimate rule under the circumstances would be to say there's a total ban on smoking and campfires and cooking. Right. That's reasonable.
Now, John, we've talked about, and we only have about a minute plus in the program, but we've talked about a lot of threats, shall we say, to our constitutional freedoms, to our rights. I get the sense, speaking to people that Canadians seem to be more complacent, a little bit more accepting of these infringements. Was there something in our drinking water? What's going on? And what are the concerns with that kind of malaise?
Look, I think, big problems typically do not arise overnight. We've had decades of failing to teach our children history in schools, and typically the Canadian kids from kindergarten to university, they are only taught the positive side of government. Government is like Santa Claus, gives you lots of free stuff. Government's good and caring and gentle and kind and provides for you. But there's a dark side to government as well that we should be, without being paranoid. It happens to be a historical fact that more people in the 20th century were murdered by their own government, talking about communist China, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, etc. More people have been murdered by their own government than the total number of soldiers killed on the battlefields. So we've had decades of indoctrination where Canadians they've only had one side of the story, and they're ignorant of history, and they don't know that government can also be a force for evil.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of the complacency.
Okay, John, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on today. We'll check in again very soon. And that's all the time we have for today. This has been Counterpoint. We'll catch you next time.